Kumlanen Ablat Gemara. We are up to Daf Chaf Amid Aleph, and the last thing we learned about was that the Brisa said that there were eidim that if we can prove the authenticity of the signature of the witnesses on the star from some other people, other sources, and then two witnesses come along and say, but they were anusim and so on and so forth. We say it's 2 against 2, and we don't throw out the star. Not that we can collect with it, but we don't throw out with it. As Rashi says, what is the point then? The point is that if the lender grabs a hold of the money, he's teifus, we don't take it back from him as well. Okay. So, and we explained here as well that that we say that hakchosha, we say that why don't we just toss it away? Because we say hakchosha is the beginning of hazama, according to Rav Sheshes at least, which means that just like Bahazama, you need the witnesses there, so too Bahakchosha, when you're contradicting the testimony, you need them here as well. In this case, but they're not here, therefore we ignore them. Nachman agreed, he said it doesn't make sense. If they would have been here, it wouldn't make a difference. Plus the fact that they would have been here, they might have been conceded. So therefore, we say that the rule goes 2 against 2, leave things status quo. And we're going to bring a story similar to that. Midi Dahavi, about 7 lines on top of the page. Midi Dahavi, Anichse de Bashatya. What happened to the state of Bashatya? Bashatya was a person who was a schizophrenic. So sometimes he was normal, sometimes he wasn't normal. We have a similar idea in Gemara Shoshana that, if he ate matzah when he was normal, and then, he was not normal, the ate and not the ate. So, he had an estate. Now, when he's a shaita, he cannot sell or buy. But when he was normal, he could. The Bashat is of he sold his estate. Also, Beitrei came along to witnesses. They said, he sold it when he was not in his full capacity, and therefore it's not a valid sale. Also, Beitrei came along another two, no, he was healthy, and therefore it's a valid sale. What do we do? Amar Bashi, Uki Taylor Haditrei, Uki Money Mechesket Bashatya. 2 against 2, and we do status quo. But here is different than by money matters. By metalton, we say wherever it's sitting, that's his house, and that's where it is. Leave it there. But when it comes to property, we say whoever owned it previously, because property doesn't move around. Property always stays in the same place. So whoever was the owner till now, status quo. So when do we say, how do we only if we've established that this Barshat was actually the owner? That we have a chazaka that he used to belong to his parents, so therefore we know for sure it was his. That's the chazaka. For example, if he himself bought it, how do we know that when he bought it, he was healthy as well? So just like just like when he sold it, we say maybe he was not in full capacity. So too, maybe when he bought it, he was not in full capacity, and he's not yotzer. Shaita cannot buy and cannot sell. Big machlek is a shaynim if you give a matana to a shaita, whether it works or not, because a matana, when it comes to buying and selling, you need 2 consenters. You need the person that's selling, the vendor, and you need the buyer. And therefore, the shaita being either one, the vendor or the buyer, is not a full capacity, so it's not a proper sale. When it comes to matana, we'll say das acheres makna. The donor is the one who's doing everything. You just have to stand there and be complicit. So therefore, there's a lot less taking place on the receiver side. It's all really taking place on the donor side. So now those who want to say that by a matana, a shaita can receive a matana because the donor is das acheres makna. Then he continues. Amar says, and we said before that you cannot be mazim witnesses unless they're standing here because you want to punish them. It says a pasuk who would be balov that you need to own the people there who are defendants have to be there present if you are going to give testimony against them that they weren't there at the time, and then they get the same punishment that they wanted to mete out to the innocent person there. But a makrish is edim shalei b'fnei. But you could contradict witnesses even though they're not there, because they're not talking about the people, they're talking about the event. And they're saying the event never happened. So therefore, we'll throw the case out. The Hazama Shalef, and even when it comes to Hazama, we said that the witnesses have to be there. The original witnesses have to be there, the ones you're testifying against. Nihida Hazama Lahavid, about Choshemi Havid. True. There's no Hazama where the law states that we believe the second pair of ages and we punish the first pair. But if the second pair comes along and says they weren't there at the time, so we no longer have really testimony as to the event. Then we're going to treat it as if the second pair is being matchish, contradicting the first pair. Nobody gets punished, but we're not going to in any way punish the defendant because it's a case of hakosha and everything status quo. We learned before, if there were witnesses. If a group of witnesses come in and say, look, they deceased, but they're not here. We recognize that signature. Or we said the alternative is that Bezin happens to have handy a star that was questioned and was challenged, and they had to verify it. And there's a stamp from the Bezin certifying that this is an authentic get. These are the correct signatures. The hooks of the Bezin. Then ain't the money. We no longer be the second pair of witnesses because we don't need their testimony at all. They're coming and trying to cancel an original start, and therefore they don't have the pesha asa pesha hit. Now the question is, why? What happens if we happen to have a star with their signatures on it that was never challenged? Why can't we use that to authenticate their signatures? Why do we need a star that was once challenged? Says the Gemara. It seems from the Braisa the only star that will accept as to support the signatures on the other star is if it was challenged and was certified by Bezin. But if it was never challenged, just because you have another star with signatures that look the same doesn't mean anything. Maybe they're both fraudulent. This supports Ravasi's view. Ravasi says, "A mekayim is a star. Elam star who's the best? We will not mekayim another star unless the original star or there's one star there that was challenged and certified." I mean, the Doi said, "What happens? We cannot find such a star. What do? We have a star here that says that Reuben owes Shimon $100 and two witnesses signed in it, but they died or they're no longer here. How do we authenticate it? Let's say these two witnesses never signed any other documents, or at least never signed documents that were ever challenged. So how in the world do we authenticate it? There must be an alternative way as well." He says, yes, there's another option. And that is, we're about 10 lines to the bottom of the day, he says, if you have two contracts, two ksuvas out there, or two fields, okay, never challenged, so they were never authenticated by Bezin. But if you have two different contracts, whatever it is, documents with their signatures on it, either two ksuvas or two sales of fields, and we know that they're not fraudulent because the buyers have both of them lived in the field for 3 years and nobody challenged them. And we learned before already, if someone lives in the field 3 years and nobody challenged them, it's too late. You cannot challenge them. Consistently. So then we know that those documents are real, and if we know that those documents are real, then we can use them to corroborate the signatures on this other stuff. But I'm going to qualify this. We need that these other shtaras do not come out from the same person that's presenting the shtar that we're trying to verify. But if it's coming from himself, it doesn't help because maybe he emulated, he was able to forge the signature because he happens to have a star in his house. So he sat there and until he got the signature correct, and he used the signature because he knows it. He has the original. So more I want to know. So what do you tell me? The reason why we cannot trust him is because maybe he's a forger. Maybe forger. If you're worried about forgery, why it's also somebody else presented. Maybe he noticed it once, looked at it, memorized the signatures, and he copied it at home. Maybe he went and saw the signatures, but also and he went ahead and he falsified or forged it. If you only saw it for a minute, no matter what kind of good artist you are, it's practically impossible to copy the signatures exactly. It's only if you happen to have it in your house, you spend a lot of time, are we worried? It has to be from somewhere else. It says in the pasuk Apish, it's in the pasuk that based on the testimony of two Eidim, and we learned before also that a star, Reish Lakish says, is Kimisha Nech Kedus Bezin, the Eidim standing before us. So we dash in P Eidim from their mouth, the Loimi picks up, not if they write something down. A person can write down his testimony on a star and testify about it many years later. Now, there's going to be a lot of ways how to learn Pshat. There's actually 3 ways in the Shem how to learn Pshat. Rashi learns Pshat the way I just told you, that he can write down let's say he saw something, he wants to write down to remember it for a long time. He knows that he'll be called upon one day, so he wants to write down all the details to remember. What color clothes he was wearing, what time it was, I don't know, all the details he wants to write down. A person may write down his Eidos on a star and testify even many years later. Provided that he remembers the events himself, and he's just looking at it to brush up. If he doesn't remember it all, the whole thing, but he looks at it and then it triggers a memory, that's good enough. These two people, the Yoda Sadducees, there were two witnesses and they know testimony. Menashe Chad Menayu, and one of them forgot. Sorry, Menashe, and then one of them forgot. Sorry, Menashe Chad Menayu, one of the agent forgot. The other witness can remind him, say, you remember this, remember that, and just to trigger his memory. That's good enough. And that's how Rashi learns. We're discussing here where the aide writes down on a piece of paper everything that happened, and then later on looks at it again. Other Rishonim Lip Shari, no, he's talking about Hagoyin and others Lip Shari. He's talking about that if you saw events and they ask you a long time later, I want you to write down the star. Record. I want you to make a proper star. It's not happening today. It happened 6 months ago. I want you to write it today. And the Gemara is saying the only time that they can write the star today is if they remember what happened 6 months ago. Otherwise, they can't write it. And that's what we're talking about over here. Anyway. So we ask a question, what about it? The defendant himself or the litigant, whatever it is, ask them to remind them that good enough. What's the difference? Who reminds them? As long as somebody reminds them, the trigger is good enough. We don't trust the defendant. He'll probably say a few extra words more than just triggering. He's going to make sure that they remember. So he's going to continue talking and waffling, and he'll be giving them more information. And then at the end, we don't know if it's memories that are being dug up or they're creating new memories. As we know, the famous psychology right now, the whole argument in psychology, when they go in and they bring up these memories from when their childhood, is it real memories or is it just, concocted memories? No, created memories. And the Hilchos and the Halacha is atzmai loy. We do not trust the person involved in the case to be the one to remind them. But if he's a tzubim rabbanon, now what's the problem if he doesn't remember? If he doesn't remember, then it has to be bepihem v'lo mepiksavam. It has to come from them and not from their writing. And here it's coming from a piece of paper that they saw, and that's the problem. And the famous question is: so how do shtaros work at all? Every shtar is basically, it says with PM, we have to hear from the witnesses. So what's the idea of a shtar? Any document. Every document is ksavim. What's the difference? Big machlek is the Rambam and the Ramban. The Ramban is in Shadish. There's a number of, before we start Sefer Mitzvahs, there's a number of shroshim, a number of cardinal principles, and Shadish Beis, the Ramban, there argues in the Rambam. The Rambam seems to learn that all shtaris are midrabanan. Because from the Torah and the Pihem B'Leim Piksabim. But the Rabbanon said we need to live as a society. How are people going to lend money? Nobody can do this, that. So therefore it's Omed Rabbanon. Because otherwise, the Pihem B'Leim Piksabim. And the Ramban asks a million questions, but mainly he asks, so how does get work? So the Torah tells us that you can give a get, the Pihem B'Leim Piksabim. The paper's not worth anything is written on, and so on and so forth. So Chaim Brisker wants to explain, including Chaim Alevi, he wants to explain that there's two kinds of shtaros. The shtare kinyan and the shtare raya. There's a star which is purely there as proof that an event happened. That star is edus, and edus is mepihem v'leim mepiksavim, and anything to do with edus is only medrabanan. But a star kinyan, for example, a star by kedushin or a star of gittin, this not to prove that this happened. This star actually what makes it happen, activates it. A star kinyan is not edus. A star kinyan is the kinyan, and therefore that's mehatayra, and that is something totally different than what we're talking about over here. And then there's long taste over here talks about also the difference between a star and not a star. Why this is not good enough as like a star. And one interesting answer of Taisus is, one is Taisus says in order for a star to be a valid star, you need two witnesses, not one. Over here you're writing for yourself. Or Taisus says you need the borrower that who it affects should be a part of it, not you writing it, unilaterally on your own. But and the third pshat in Taisus is, let me see if I can remember. Just 1 second, I just forgot the third translation. It was an interesting one. The third translation depends the format. When you write down, notes, Rosh Prokim, you write down notes for you to remember. That's not a format of a star. Star is a professional document, and it's formatted in a certain way. And that's the problem. In order for a star to be a star, it needs to be written the correct, syntax and format and so on and so forth. Anyway, let's continue. However, if this person who's involved in the case, defendant, living, whatever it is a rabbi who will be honest, will trust him that he will just give enough information to trigger the person's mind without providing too much information, creating memories. Rav Ashi once knew some testimony that was supporter of Kahana. Now there must be two Rav Kahanas, as we know. We already had it places because we'll have another more about Kabar. Rav Kahana was the main student of Rav, and he had to flee for his life, and he ran to Yisrael. Beautiful story. We'll see in Kufi Dalad in Baba Kama. And no way that Rav Kahana lived in time of Rav Ashi, who Rav was the first time Rav Ashi was the last time Rav. Impossible. So there were two Rav Kahanas. So anyway, he knew testimony for Rav Kahana. Remember this event? I don't remember. The lab and then he said, didn't this and this happen? I don't remember. The end, he mentioned a few more words, he remembered. So Rav Ashi Asalei, so Rav Ashi went ahead and he testified on behalf of Rav Kahana. Chazi saw Rav Kahana to have him mechasas. So Rav Kahana was very reticent to accept this testimony because Rav Kahana felt that he felt that he basically provided all the information of Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi just parroting what Rav Kahana said, and that's not Edis. So Rav Ashi said to him, because the Gemara is proving here, Tamil Chacham, I'm going to be honest. So Rav Kahana himself didn't want to take this Edis, even though this would support his case. Rav Ashi said to him, "Me sabred Allah kasamichna. Do you think for a minute I'm relying on you? I know who did I am remembering myself. I sat there and I thought about it. You told me, and I went through the facts in my mind, and then suddenly it triggered a memory, and it came back." Okay, says the Gemara. We're now going to talk about memory. How long do people remember things for? You know, I can forget things from moment to moment. Where I put my car keys, where I put my phone down. And the Gemara is going to give us an incredible idea of what's considered a poor memory, and it's pretty scary. Tanan Hossa, so many people today can fit in that. We learned over there. Okay, we know that in Eretz Yisrael we try to minimize the number of places where people buried because Kohanim have to be able to traverse the land without being concerned that they're going to become tamei. As we'll see, the Shlaki said, you know, they found any slight heter, any excuse to say this is Torah, they made it Torah. So what happens? You see a mound, you see little hills, you know, out next to a road, like Lahavli. You see, you know, what you see a thing of bouquet of flowers next to a road. You know that there was an accident there. Whatever you see mounds next to a road. If you see a mound next to a road, in those days, there's a sign that somebody must have been buried there. Or so this is the Mishnah said. We learned over there. These are hills, little mounds. If they're nearby, what do you mean nearby? Mainly if they're nearby a city, or or whether they're near the main road. Echad chadash is whether it's brand new. The echad yishan is whether it's old. Tamei is it is tamei. If it is old, it's tamei because we're saying that maybe somebody was buried there and people just forgot. If it's new, it's tamei for a different reason altogether. Because if somebody was buried there, people would remember. We're concerned that maybe a woman miscarried. She's too embarrassed to tell anybody, so she went in the middle of the night, close as possible to the road or to the city, and she buried it over there. So chadashes we're worried about a navel. We're worried about a miscarriage. Okay. What do you call it? Harachaikis. But if they are so chadashes mean that nobody remembers this mound. Suddenly it appeared out of nowhere. And definitely, if somebody was buried there, we would have known about it. So it must be because it's a navel, because it's near the city. You know, a woman wouldn't go too far, so it must have gone there, buried, and that's it. What about al-chaykis? They're far away. Now, what exactly is the definition of close and far? We're soon going to see a machlaykis tonight. But al-chaykis, if it's far away, so then we can assume a woman would never go on her own. Remember the whole idea? She's embarrassed. She would never go on her own too far, because you don't usually go at nighttime when nobody's traveling, and she'd be scared. So her chaykis if it's far away. Chadashas if it's brand new to her, we're not going to assume a woman there's a navel there at all. So nobody's there, and it's not an ordinary person buried there because we remember. Yishanas, but if it's old for a long time, then Tameas, even if it's far away, it's Tamei because maybe we don't remember. Eizahu Kureva. Now, interesting. The Ramban says over here that far away is Tamei. Ramban learns over here that maybe there used to be a city right there, and the city was destroyed, and therefore there's nobody to remember because there's no city there anymore, and nobody goes there. But there used to be a city right there, and there used to be some kind of a basic quarters. Anyway, Ezer Kreva, what's considered close, adjacent? Within 50 amas is adjacent. Where do we get the idea of 50 amas? We have the same thing Gemara about Basra and Lagachber regarding birds from a chicken coop. What's considered karav and what's considered rachak? Karav is within 50 amas and rachak is beyond. So that's where 50 amas comes from. So the Eza Yishana, what's considered, that's close. Now you're saying old. What's old? Shishim Shana. Old is 60 years. If it's anything less than 60 years, people would remember. If it's more than 60 years old, that means the people alive today would have been, if a person lived 70 years, would have been under 10. Okay, they never knew in the first place. So therefore, there's nothing for them to remember. But if they were old enough to remember, they would remember. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. You know what Kreva is? She ain't Kreva in Kreva, the whole idea of Kreva is worried about a woman. She is not, it doesn't matter 50 amas, 20 amas, 30. The closest mound is a nafel. Anything beyond that is not her. She wouldn't have gone any further. Even though, let's say one mound is 20 amas away, the second mound is 30 amas away. The 30 amas mound is not the word is Torah. She definitely wouldn't have gone that far. She would have gone as close as possible. Yishana, what's an old one? An old one is that nobody remembers. Forget about 60 years. A place that nobody remembers. There's nobody says, oh, I remember like the Ramaz, there used to be a town over here and whatever. No, nobody remembers there was mound was ever here before. My ear or my derech. What's the story here? What do you mean? The city or the road? What's going on here? Ilema ear means ear mamash if it's near the city, and derech means derech mamash the main road. Okay, we see a mound, we don't know what it is, so automatically we can assume it's a caver. But for Ha'amar Shlach Ilamot, so they found some kind of excuse, a pretext for Tira Yisrael. They don't want to make profligate Tumah in Yisrael. If you have a mound and you don't know what it is, you will say that it's not a basic chorus, unless there's a strong chance that it is. Why is there a strong chance that it is? Just because it's a mound. Automatically you assume it's somebody's buried there. Arab Zayda, Ir means Ir Hasmuch LeBeis HaKvaros. Ir means a city that's adjacent to a cemetery. And Derech means Derech Beis HaKvaros, the road to the cemetery. And so on the way to the cemetery, therefore there's a possibility or a strong likelihood that this was a burial site. Now there's more after this. I understand. If the road going to the cemetery, so why in the world are you burying a mound rather than just going to the cemetery? I can understand the circumstances. What is that? The Zimni, the Misrami, Bein Hashmoshes. What happens whenever it says Bein Hashmoshes, even though every single day you have twilight, it always means Friday night, because that's the only time the Bein Hashmoshes really matters. And what happens? They're bringing the dead into somewhere, and then it's suddenly Friday night, and they can't carry anymore. They have no choice. They have to leave the body where it is. And once you bury somebody, you don't take them out. It happened that they had to bury them in this mound. A city that's a close proximity to a cemetery. What's going on here? When it comes to the city and the cemetery, you know exactly how long it takes to get from the city to the cemetery, and you can plan. You don't just happen to, if suddenly it's Friday night, you would have made sure that you had enough time to bring the body to the cemetery and bury it properly. So what's this mound? Why are you chayshish that the mound right outside the city next to the basic quarters is a cave? At least one of the basic quarters, the cooler basic quarters, I would rather go to the basic quarters. Says, I'll tell you what this is. We're worried. Women are embarrassed to say they miscarried. They don't want to go to Chebra Kaddish and make a whole deal. They don't want anyone to know. So they're going to bury outside of the cemetery. And somebody who never has like leprosy or other kind of mukesh chin memorial that his limbs fall off his body, and limbs are also metame, and they have to be buried. They have to be buried. In fact, the big machlekes of teeth and these kind of things have to be buried, but limbs have to be buried. So therefore, Ozli. So up within 50 amos of the cemetery, she's happy. She doesn't want to bury in the cemetery, she'll bury outside, but nearby. So within 50 amos, it makes sense. She's not so scared. But Faye, if she has to travel more than 50 amos from the city beyond the cemetery, is Dabra Inish Bahado. She'll always take a man with her. And therefore, somebody would know. And they would go to the cemetery. It seems two things there. She would take a man, and plus she would go to, and once the man knows anyway, can't trust them because the word will get out. So she would already go to the cemetery itself. So there's no reason to worry that mounds beyond 50 amos would have a navel inside them. We don't just assume that there's tumah and there's burial sites all over. Oh, but Chiza said, so what are we trying to bring from all this? We glean for a mayor. How far back does a person's memory go? If a person wrote down testimony for himself about an event that happened many years ago, up to 60 years, if he looks in the papers, I remember, we're going to trust him. People can remember that far back. But if it's 65 years ago and he looks at the papers, oh yeah, I remember, we don't believe it. We believe that you're creating new memories and you think that's what happened. It never happened. Gemara said, lo, v'lohi. Gemara said, no, I believe that people can remember even further than 60 years. Is any? Why would you remember if somebody was buried over there? It just happened to be that you saw it. So therefore, 60 years is long enough time. Over here, when you put it down on a piece of paper, you deliberately put it down there because you wanted to remember it. Something that you want to remember, you can remember forevermore. Even longer than 60 years. It's embarrassing because I don't remember things from 60 years ago, and so on and so on. Yet the Gemara says it's possible to, if you apply to memory, you can remember things from many, many, many years ago.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
How many months pregnant would a woman need to be if she has a miscarriage that it's going to be Tom?
More than 40 days.
Then it's Tommy, mate.
Yeah, remember you had the Gemara Pesachim that test over there. The tent of a goy is Tameh because we assume that they bury their fetuses in the tent. And they'll have a number of fetuses there, and they have to be over 40 days old. Because we had in Gemara that Maya Ba'alma, remember Rav Chizda said there that Maya Ba'alma, the first 40 days, let's say she's a Bas Kohen, married to Yisro, and then the husband died, she goes back home, and she can eat Truma again. What happens? She's pregnant, so the child will be a Yisro. So we say that the first 40 days she can still continue eating Truma because the child is Maya Ba'alma. It's only water. And also we learn more bracha at the end of the last page. The first 40 days you can still daven to change the gender of the child. In other words, if there's nothing there yet, once it's 40 days, it has form and the gender has been established. So it's 40
I'm not
days.
sure if I learned this 60 or 65 years ago, but you might be triggering new memories.
Oh, okay. I wish I remember what I learned last week. So yeah. Obviously, the Gemara says that if you really want to remember it, you can remember it forever. So the chassan is in us. We have to really want to remember. Okay. If there were two Eidim, sorry, Reuben and Shimon. Reuben said, "This is my handwriting. It's my signature, and I recognize the signature of my partner, my colleague." And the other witness says, "So there's two witnesses for each one. Myself and my peer is testifying about my signature, and I and him are testifying on his signature. They are believed. Why? We treat it as if there's two witnesses on each signature. What happens if each one just recognized, a lot of times you would get two different witnesses coming out at the same time and you don't know each other. So he says, I recognize my signature, I don't know his signature. So each signature now only has a single witness. Behold, you have to get another outsider with each one of them to have, because you need two witnesses to certify each signature. That's Rebbe's opinion. However, the Chachamim say, the Chachamim say you don't need to bring another witness in to have two. It's enough. If each one said, this is my signature, it's good enough. I don't have to bring any other witnesses. I can say about my own signature, testify about my own signature, it's my signature. Now, what is going on here? What's the machlekes? It's a fascinating machlekes. And that is as follows. When we testify about a shtar, are we testifying that these signatures are real, or are we testifying the events happen? Are we testifying that the document is real, or are we testifying that the events are real? Are we talking about the mana in the shtar, or are we talking about the ksav yodon on the format and the shtar itself that was written? And that's the machlekes here between the two. If you want, I'll explain to you. According to Rebbe, I'll explain to you. They're testifying about the signatures, and therefore, if we testify about the signatures, you need two witnesses for each signature. We need two witnesses. So it's myself, and I have to bring an outsider to be the second witness. But the Chachamim hold the Chachamim say, what are you testifying? The fact that the event happened. So we have two witnesses. When I say this is my signature, what am I really saying? I'm saying is that I was there, it's real, and I saw the transaction that Reuben was lending Shimon $100. And when my peer testified about his signature, what is he saying? That he saw the transaction. So at the end of the day, we have two witnesses who saw the transaction. So that's good enough.